Hello, I'm Ed Needham, editor of the fabulous literary magazine Strong Words, and this is my podcast, The 5 Rules of Writing. In each episode, I speak to a most excellent writer in a particular genre about how they do it. And if you'd like to know more about Strong Words, and specifically how to subscribe, go to www.strong-words.co.uk and you'll be whisked straight to the website. Hello, and welcome to the 5 Rules of Writing, brought to you by Strong Words magazine. If you'd like to find out more about Strong Words and think you'd like to subscribe, take a look at the website. That's strong-words.co.uk. Don't forget the hyphen. Now, this is a podcast where I talk to writers about the 5 things they know to be true in writing whatever it is that they write for a living. So whether they spend their days writing angry political essays or poetry about woodland creatures, there are some aspects of their work that are absolutely non-negotiable. Now, today, I'm very excited to be talking to a guest who is a journalist and novelist whose highly accomplished debut is called The Dictator's Wife. This is a book set in 1993 in a country called Yanusia, which is a small Eastern European fragment that has lost its communist strongman, but his formidable wife remains holed up in the presidential palace, awaiting trial for the crimes of her husband's years of rule. Crimes which include torture, disappearances, and using the treasury as their piggy bank. To be found guilty would mean the death penalty, and a team of top London lawyers has been hired to defend her, including the novel's protagonist, a young woman who was born in Yanusia, but whose parents fled to London when she was small. So we have the dictator's wife, who is called Maria Popper, a portrait in chilly power, dressed in red couture, still able to terrify with a glance, and who insists she knew nothing of her husband's activities, a stance which everything about her demeanour suggests is an absurd assertion. And we have our young lawyer, whose name is Laura Lazarescu, who is torn between doing her lawyerly duty in defending this highly compromised and supremely manipulative figure, and also finding out what happened to her parents, and by extension, the Yanusian people, who had to endure decades of fear under the rule of this couple. So here to share her 5 rules of writing and anti-heroine, I'd like to welcome Freya Berry. Freya, hi.
Hi, Ed. It's great to be here. Thank you so much.
Well, congratulations on this most tremendous of debuts. How has publishing a successful debut novel measured up to your expectations?
Well, I was quite careful never to let myself have any expectations of anything, including up to and including getting published full stop. So yes, which also meant I was hideously unprepared for the whole process at the same time. So it's been great. It's been very busy and hectic, but every so often I do just sort of look at the book and think, yeah, I wrote that. So that's nice too.
Well, congratulations. Now, you're also a financial and political journalist. Did your job help in creating this figure of the dictator's wife?
Yes, hugely. So I used to work at Reuters, covering corporate mergers and acquisitions, which was just as fun as it sounds. And then after a short stint covering Brexit, I went on to the Daily Mail just to cover the US election. And so, and actually, weirdly, both of those jobs fed into what became The Dictator's Wife, which does have a sort of financial strand running through it, but don't let that put you off. And I guess, watching the US election in 2016 unfold and watching the Melania Trump and the sort of glamorous silence that surrounds her, that was really what planted the seed for my character of Maria Popper. I sort of started working from that character and pulling in other strands from other sort of notorious or famous or infamous leaders' wives, and it sort of grew from there.
Okay. It feels, I mean, I met Melania once, long before obviously she had just become Donald Trump's girlfriend, and I lived in the United States at the time. We did a shoot with her, and she was just a fabulously down-to-earth person. I really liked her, I have to say.
Wow.
She wasn't this figure who sort of hides behind a giant Jackie O sunglasses and scowls at people. She was really lovely, very down to earth.
I'd be interested, to know, how she compares in real life now. How, being that close to power changes you, I suppose.
Quite. That was 20 years ago. But I mean, also your book, it feels formidably authentic as a portrait of a post-communist Eastern European ruling house. Do you have some Janusian in your own industry?
Thank you very much. No, actually, I think that authenticity came out of visiting Eastern Europe. Obviously, I couldn't visit Tunisia except in my head, but I went to Romania as well as Bosnia and the Czech Republic and several other countries for several months for research. And that was fascinating because it felt, while obviously the country in the book is fictional, it felt important to try and ground it in as much fact as possible, particularly as, 1989 it's sort of very much set in that real life aftermath of the Iron Curtain coming down. So I pitched up in Bucharest in the February of 2017 and actually inadvertently found myself in the middle of the largest protest they'd had since 1989. So walked in. My Airbnb host and I headed straight out and put my bags down and headed straight out to join the protest. And, we got tear gassed and all that kind of thing on that night and successive nights. So it was a very dramatic way to find myself researching a novel. But sort of fascinating. And people were very, very kind in sharing their stories of life under communism with me, which really fed into that.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's quite a difficult fragrance, isn't it? To digest tear gas nightly. From Strong Words magazine, these are the 5 rules of writing. So we're going to look at your 5 rules anyway of creating an anti-heroine, and she is a truly extraordinary figure, this Maria Popper. Your first rule, Freya, you say work out why you want an anti-hero rather than a straight villain hero. So tell me why you wanted to create one with your first novel and what your feelings are towards this woman, Maria Popper.
So when I first set out to write the book, I kind of just thought of her as a straight villain, to be honest. But then, because she is, sitting at the center of this corrupt and fairly dreadful regime, as so many of these women do. So it's, sort of a straightforward villain character. There was obviously no way that she could be a hero. But then as I started writing, the whole arc of the story is Laura being lured in by this woman. And I realized I wanted the reader to be lured in as well. You have to be sort of in Laura's position and just as sort of vulnerable as she is, just as sort of seducible, I guess. So I had to sort of start finding ways to make Maria sympathetic in some way, and it felt too cheap to just say, sometimes she gives to charity, so she's not all bad. I wanted her to be a really ambiguous character and to play with the reader's emotions and spend a long time sort of calibrating how we feel about her at each stage of the book. And then also because I base this on several real life dictators' wives, so Asma al-Assad, Imelda Marcos, and so on. And obviously, while these women are pretty evil, if you read interviews with them or you watch interviews with them, they're very charming as well. And that's that dynamic is very fascinating to me, how we can be charmed by surfaces and glamour, which sort of conceals the darkness behind. I actually, Imelda Marcos is terrible in every way, but I do kind of like her. If you just separate everything that she is away from that, she's very persuasive, and I thought that dynamic was fascinating.
Yes, I mean, that's something I'd like to talk about a little bit later, but have you ever met anyone like Maria?
A good question. No, I think it would be a fairly terrifying experience if I did. I think there's something about very strong-willed people. I've met a couple of strong-willed people in my time. Yes, but I've never met anyone quite on that. Chilling but glamorous playing field. I think that. I think the only people who are like that tend to be people who become very great and very terrible figures. So yeah.
Yes, quite. I mean, are there any, when you were planning your book, were there a great anti-heroines in literature that you wanted to emulate, or who inspired you to try and create your own anti-heroine?
Yeah. So I very much liked there's the sort of classical mold of, Anna Karenina or Madame Bovary and the sort of female anti-heroine way on a sort of smaller domestic scale, obviously. I was very inspired by Lady Macbeth. I don't know if I don't think she is a villain, because, by the end we do feel empathy for her. But I actually really did struggle to find female anti-heroines, which I thought, was interesting. There's lots of male equivalents, sort of talented Mr. Ripley types and so on. But to have a female template, I thought the Lady Macbeth was probably the closest I could come, and I thought maybe that was a sign that it was time to have another go. Not that I'm comparing myself at all with Shakespeare, but I think we don't allow women to be. Well, either women are straightforwardly wicked, or they're sort of versionary types, and I wanted someone between the two poles.
Okay. Now, your second rule, Freya, you said play with the reader's perceptions. How have you done this? What's your favourite trick?
Well, I'm not very good at plotting or planning my books, shall I say. I sort of charge in and then regret it later. So repent at leisure. So what I found myself doing was mapping very strictly when I wanted the reader to be sympathetic to Maria and when I wanted them to be unsettled by them. And that kind of had to track most of the way through with how Laura was feeling about Maria. So I literally did my recommendation is to just sort of sit down and work out those precise moments in correspondence with the plot as to when you want them to be the heroine and when you want them to be the anti-heroine. It takes a lot more scaffolding behind the scenes than for someone who can just be straightforwardly wicked or straightforwardly good throughout.
Right. One of the things that I really liked about the book, with regard to sort of playing with readers' perceptions, is just how this sort of architecture of the palace and these official buildings, where there are always these kind of doors that people just seem to appear from unnoticed. There's a whole secret garden. There's this door that opens unexpectedly because this old secret policeman has anticipated that she's going to be there. Was this a big part of your thinking? This almost sort of magic box building that they're all in?
Yeah, it's a really good point. So I love, I'm a big fan of, say, Daphne du Maurier and Rebecca, another great auntie, or maybe she's just a villain actually. But that Manderley sense of, the house almost being a character of its own, that claustrophobia, that sort of feeling of entrapment. So I try to sort of create that sense, and that was fed also by my time in Eastern Europe. So, I went to visit the Ceausescus, the leading couple of Romania who were deposed in 1989. I went to visit their Golden Palace. I went to visit the Parliament, which is literally jaw-dropping. It's the second largest administrative building in the world. Its scale is like 7 Buckingham Palaces piled on top of each other. It's extraordinary. So I did want that sense of crossing over that liminal boundaries. Poarta, which is the name of the capital city, and that means threshold. So in Romanian, so I did want to have that sense of not knowing what's kind of coming around the corner, what's going to appear in the corner of your eyes.
Right, and she's very good at being in charge, isn't she? She, with the sort of slightest facial gesture or just a couple of words, it's very clear that she is the boss. She sets the tone, she sets the atmosphere. She's quite at home in this seat of power. Yet she claims she knew absolutely nothing of her husband's atrocities. And I kind of find myself tempted to believe her, because she's such a convincing character. But how do you create this sense that she radiates such power and danger?
So I partly based the novel on Imelda Marcos's trial in 1990 in New York, where she was let off. She was also tried for her husband's crimes. He was dead by that point, Ferdinand. And she was let off and, sort of pleaded a case that she was just a housewife who didn't know where the money was coming from, which again is sort of difficult to believe. But that's the dance the peculiarly female dance that these women are able to play, playing off their femininity, weaponizing it. because we live in a world where women are sort of underestimated and they can exploit that. But I read a playwright, I can't remember who it was now, but who said there's nothing so fascinating as strong-willed people, and I really loved the idea of creating someone who with a look can sort of chill any statesman at 20 paces. So I really just had to, and I'm not very much not like that in real life, I wish I was, but so I had to really sort of dig deep and think what would it be like to mold the world around you and to remake it at your will. It's fascinating.
Yeah, she is a human air conditioning unit, isn't she? She lowers the temperature instantly.
Exactly.
She's very effective. So number 3, or rule 3, again, quite a difficult one, I think. You say find a way for the reader to be on their side at times. Otherwise, you've just got a villain. How do you do this? How do you make somebody who has torture chambers in her basement likable?
Yeah, it's a tough one, I'm not going to lie. Well, as I say, I felt a bit glib to just say, she gives to charity sometimes, for example. I mean, so Maria in the book, she's come out of the Unisian orphanage system, which is kind of parallel to the Romanian orphanage system, which is sort of was notoriously brutal. So I needed to give her that... that sort of difficult backstory. If she'd just come from wealth and privilege, she is eventually adopted by a wealthy family, but she couldn't just come from a position of privilege. That didn't feel like that would sort of get the reader on their side at any point. But again, I mean, Mao's wife, for example, Chang Ching, she was so hungry when she was a child that it left her with lifelong stomach issues. So there is a hunger to these women. They often do come from rags to riches when they marry their chosen husband. It takes a certain drive and a certain hell-bent focus on survival to get into this position. So in terms of making her likable, I had to give her that sort of insecurity, that gap in her past, and then for her present day, I mean, she did have the excuse of not actually being a dictator, which is her sort of superpower. She gets to have her cake and eat it. She gets to stand by her side, but not actually be in the room when she doesn't want to be. So I just had to play with that with the readers, with what we felt that we could hold her culpable for, and what we would sort of let her off for.
Okay, I mean, you mentioned some of these real dictators' wives, and researching them must have just been a dream, I think. Certainly, but we kind of assume people like, the Ceausescus or the Marcoses, they were, they kind of were dreadful, but they also exist in people's minds as just a couple of fragments of information, like the shoe collection and there's this story of the Ceausescus being the only foreign dignitaries that the Queen ever expressed an opinion on, and just how, with by implication, just how awful they were. And but there's not actually an awful lot to go on there, is there? If most people sat down and kind of wrote what they knew about the Marcoses or the Ceausescus, there wouldn't be an awful lot. So, did you find once you started looking into these people, did you find the reality very different and a bit more sympathetic than when you started?
I wouldn't say sympathetic. I think they were still pretty bad. But it is, it is interesting, not just to sort of learn a bit more about them, but also to consider that these are actual people, not monsters or figures. They sort of have their own internal lives. And actually, just on the point of what we think we know about Imelda, of the Marcoses, the shoes is always the obvious one, and how brilliant is that? Rather than extrajudicial killings, you think of shoes. I mean, what a PR stunt, PR triumph there. So it was fascinating to delve more into them. I mean, I read for example, a book called Red Horizons by a defecting general from the Ceausescu regime, which talks about the excess. They'd import food from 25 different countries for a single banquet, for example. Elena would have a tantrum if she couldn't get hold of a super yacht or her black pearls or her mink stoles or whatever it was. So adding those details in, a lot of them I just literally just lifted out of real life examples and put them in my own novel as examples of the decadence there. So no, I can't say I felt hugely sympathetic to them, but you do need to create someone that's more than just a sort of paper villain or whatever. Fleshing them out and giving them those inner lives felt very important to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now your fourth rule on creating an anti-heroine, you say plan how you want to leave the reader feeling at the end. So I try to think, well, how did I feel at the end of this? And so see if I felt the correct way.
Oh, tell me.
But so some of the things, one of the things I felt was exhausted. Obviously not, I still had not, that I had to lie down, but just the sense that there are, there are kind of forces at work here that are just too great for a happy future to just emerge. The terrible things that people did are going to be around for generations. This is very sort of a drain, a sense that, this country just can't escape from its, what's happened in recent years. So that was one thing. And I also felt that Maria is just a completely different category of person to most people. Her survival skills and her mastery of other people puts her in a league of her own. And then the other thing, I thought, I've just got to get it into my head that when I see highly paid lawyers appear in a book or a film, I've got to stop thinking that this kind of means that justice is coming, and more. I've got to look at who's paying them. That's the thing I think that's really important when lawyers appear in fiction. They promise justice, but they're working for somebody else. So anyway, I suppose those were three things that I just jotted down very quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
Did I feel the right thing?
No, I think those are the right. Those are very much the right things. So thumbs up there. So thank you. I think on the point about the sort of country being swallowed or continue trying to escape its past, I hesitate to make too much of a connection with Ukraine because it's not somewhere I've ever visited or know anything more about than everyone else. But that is a country that was trying to or has been trying to remake itself and escape its past. And the last couple of weeks have shown that certain other actors are very unwilling to let them do so. So I think it's a perennial issue of how countries are molded and remolded, and it's sort of too glib and a happy ending for the country in my novel just felt too glib and too easy because communism in Eastern Europe cast a long shadow, and there are people in Romania now who I talked to who said we don't know if 1989 was a revolution or a coup. And the protests, indeed, that I attended were against the newly elected descendants of that same Communist Party who had been overthrown, sort of 30 years previously. So, yes, the past is a way of hanging around and clinging to us. And then, sorry, you're going to have to remind me of your second point.
Well, my second point was about Maria and just how she is just a completely different category of individual. Her ability to, she displays this tremendous tenacity. She knows exactly what she's got to do to survive. She is an absolute master manipulator of other people. She just knows instantly where people's weaknesses are and how to put her beautifully manicured finger on that sort of weak to get them to do, to do her bidding.
Exactly.
So yes, that was my feeling about her.
No, exactly. And I mean, I don't know if I go so far as to use the word sociopath, but I did read a book called Confessions of a Sociopath, which I would recommend as a way to sort of help my perspective on her. Someone who sees the world in terms of its mechanics, not in terms of its sort of emotional significance or right and wrong. Amoral people are, I think their way is to cut through the world is made much easier for them because they don't have to ever consider what they're doing to everyone else. So it was very interesting to sort of put myself in behind the eyes of someone who would be like that. I mean, the world felt a lot freer as a place, I have to say. And then, on your point about the lawyers, I think everyone right now is thinking, actually, where does money come from, and where do rich people sort of get their reserves? I mean, as a financial journalist, had an interesting time interviewing, a couple of billionaires and speaking to corporations and CEOs of, say, mining corporations who I knew were tearing up, various bits of, East Asia, for example. And they were always very charming and very nice. And you just sort of start to see the world in gradual shades of grey rather than the black and white that is so lulling to see it by.
Yes, quite. And your fifth rule, which kind of speaks to that. Again, you said, don't be afraid of ambiguity, and as you've just said, ambiguities can, these people can be quite charming, even with their, quite violent and cruel associations, the presidential palaces that are all, Baroque splendor on the outside and torture chambers in the basement, these kind of things. Was this very much, how you envisaged, you wanted Maria to embody all these characteristics without ever really, sort of coming down on one side or another. It's quite easy to be both things.
Exactly. It's, we live in an increasingly politically polarized world. And yes, there are some things which are unequivocally bad, but just sort of condemning them as such is not a very helpful way of sometimes of looking at it. I think as novelists, as a whole, I guess you're trying to understand what makes people do the things that they do, and what are the steps that make you end up somewhere absolutely absurd or awful, and I think we've all got incidents in our life where we end up doing something where you think, how did I get here? I certainly do, and so yeah, it was about analyzing the million steps to the cliff edge, and playing with the reader's emotions on the way. I think I say in the book that she dances on the shard of your doubt, and that is just how I wanted it. At the same time, I'm also a really big fan of a solid ending. I don't like books that sort of dribble out. So it was something I had to work quite hard at to give an ending that wasn't happy and wasn't sad, but was somehow conclusive, and yet sort of neither. That ambiguity had to be
right. I guess you also had to kind of debrief a lot of old communists, when you were in Eastern Europe, and who are they are living ambiguities, servants of one very, loyal servants of a very fierce regime, and now something else.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's interesting. There's a lot of nostalgia around communism in Eastern Europe, even in East Germany. They have the traffic lights, Ampelmann. It's called their little green red man on their pedestrian crossings, and they were meant to change them out, and people got very protective over them and said they wanted to keep them. So, and particularly actually. The young are free to be more condemning of communism, but the older people who actually live through it are often, the ones that I spoke to, while having had obviously very difficult experiences, so many of them said actually, it was kind of nice to have the certainty. Everyone had a job, and fine, no one earned any money, but you sort of knew where you were, you knew you weren't going to advance anyway. It removed the uncertainty and the sort of rat race of capitalism, and I think people found some comfort in that, despite obviously many other difficult conditions.
Yes, quite. And obviously the whole, big part of the big theme of the story is that it's building to this trial, which the lawyers are supposedly there to defend her against the indefensible. If you were, if you were sat on the jury, you don't need to reveal the result of the outcome of the trial, but if you'd been sat on the jury, how would you have voted, guilty or not guilty?
Well, I like to think that I'd have seen through her. I think that I would not be swayed by things like charm and charisma. But the truth is, we all tend to be to an extent. And, for example, if I've ever met a famous person, I've been, disgustingly starstruck, and afterwards think, what was I doing? Just jabbering inanely at them. So we all like to think of ourselves as rational human beings. That's what's so interesting about it. We like to think that we make choices based on evidence and rationality, but actually we are animals who are alarmingly susceptible to appearances, for example.
Quite. I think that's exactly it. I think if I were in that jury box, whatever the evidence were, that mixture of, formidable lawyers and this awesomely manipulative and beautifully turned out individual, I'm sure I would have pressed the not guilty button.
Well, it's good to know, because exactly, it's we're not as clever as we think we are, I think.
Quite. And now I'm going to ask you my two novelist, my two writer questions that I ask everybody. If you, Freya, what do you consider to be a good day's work for a novelist in terms of number of words?
Oh, brutal. So if I'm writing a first draft, then I like to sort of play the frog in the hot water with myself. You sort of start off at a certain reasonable temperature, and then you sort of gradually turn up the heat without yourself noticing, is the idea. So I'll start off writing maybe 500 words a day, and then I'll gradually ratchet myself up as my deadline nears to about 2,000, which is extremely exhausting and I'm not fun to be around during that time. So
okay. Okay. And my other question is, where do you stand on this point of the one thing that almost all writers have in common is that writers hate writing? Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I mean, I always think, it's very easy to moan, we've got the hardest job in the world. And then you think, well, actually, I could be, probably wouldn't say that to a coal miner. What did I read the other day? Someone saying writing is like reading, except the book is trying to kill you. I mean, it is difficult. I don't want to make it sound like it's, like I'm doing sort of prize-worthy bravery over here. But it is very draining, because you're taking out of yourself and you are putting things onto a previously intimidatingly blank page. And it does take something out of you. It takes that, to constantly be putting yourself behind someone else's eyes is an exhausting thing. So I do this because I'm not, I don't think anyone writes because it manages to sustain being a writer if they hate it sincerely. But I do love it, and I do have moments where I think this is God. I absolutely love what I'm doing, but those are flashes, brief flashes amid sheer bloody mindedness, which I think is actually 90% of writing. Right. It's just keeping going. Because the tough going is always tough, really. So,
brilliant. Freya, thank you so much for talking to me. And I urge everybody listening to this to stop what they're doing immediately and go and buy The Dictator's Wife, and then having bought it, read it and bathe in its wonders. It's an absolutely fabulous novel, and I hope it finds the gigantic audience it deserves. Freya, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ed. Thanks again.
From Strong Words magazine, these are the 5 rules of writing.